Texas, 1969. A cold case once buried under decades of silence has now been solved. Clarissa Elaine Mendoza, a 20-year-old department store cosmetics clerk with a soft smile and dreams of opening her own beauty line, vanished after leaving work on a humid June evening. Her car was found idling near an empty lot, driver's door ajar, her purse still inside. For years, the investigation stalled. Leads went nowhere. Evidence degraded. Whispers of police missteps lingered. Now, over 50 years later, a breakthrough in DNA technology has cracked the case wide open, and the identity of her killer has stunned the community. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. Clarissa Elaine Mendoza was the kind of person who didn't just walk into a room, she warmed it. In the tight-knit working-class neighborhoods of Southeast Houston, she was known for her grace, her kindness, and the quiet strength she carried like a second skin. At just 20 years old, she was already standing on her own 2 feet, working full-time behind the cosmetics counter at one of the city's largest department stores. Her days were spent carefully recommending lipsticks, powder shades, and perfume bottles to a steady flow of customers, many of whom asked for her by name. Clarissa had a gentle way of making women feel seen, understood. But she didn't just work the counter, she had a dream. Every paycheck she earned went into a glass jar tucked in her dresser drawer, labeled with a single word written in pink nail polish, Escuela. She wanted to attend beauty school, not just for the diploma, but to open her own salon one day. She envisioned a bright little shop, maybe painted peach, filled with mirrors, laughter, and the soft hum of blow dryers. Her family, especially her mother and grandmother, believed in her. Clarissa was going to be the first in the family to run her own business. The Mendoza family was a tight unit, deeply Catholic, proud of their Mexican roots, and fiercely protective of one another. Clarissa, the oldest of 4 siblings, had always played a nurturing role. Every morning before work, she walked her youngest cousin to school, made sure her brothers were fed, and reminded her mom about grocery lists. Houston in 1969 was a city caught between eras. It was booming with economic promise, but the echoes of inequality still rang loud in its streets. Clarissa had learned early how to move through the world carefully. She dressed modestly, spoke respectfully, and minded her surroundings. But despite the invisible fences of that time, she never dimmed her light. By June of that year, things were looking up. Clarissa had just been promoted to full-time at the store. She'd saved enough for her first round of beauty classes. She was even planning to buy her mother a new Sunday dress for church. There was a brightness in her that summer, like she could finally see the life she wanted taking shape. The night before her disappearance, she had helped her younger sister braid her hair for a school event. Her mother remembered hearing her hum an old Spanish lullaby as she folded laundry. Everything about that week felt normal, peaceful. But peace has a way of masking the storm that's just around the corner. Friday, June 13, 1969, began like any other for Clarissa. She packed her purse, slipped on her favorite rose-colored lipstick, and kissed her grandmother on the cheek before heading out. Her shift would end late that night. She promised to bring home leftover pastries from the store's cafe. She never did. That night, Clarissa's absence would send ripples of panic through her family. And when her car was discovered abandoned, still idling with her purse untouched inside, everything they knew shattered. Something had happened on that short trip home. Something no one could explain. But what happened on her way home that night? Friday, June 13, 1969, began like any other for Clarissa Elaine Mendoza. She woke up early, helped her mother with breakfast, and ironed her store uniform with care. The day was long. The department store had kicked off its annual summer sale, and the cosmetics counter was swarmed with customers. Clarissa stayed composed, offering lip gloss recommendations and shade-matching foundations with her usual warmth. She clocked out at 9:07 p.m. sharp. Co-workers later said she looked tired but cheerful. She told them she had an early morning church event to help with and planned to head straight home. She had no plans to meet anyone. No detours, just the quiet drive down Telephone Road, a well-worn path she'd taken dozens of times before. A parking lot attendant told investigators he saw her walking toward her beige Chevrolet Nova. She waved politely as she climbed in, the car starting with a soft rumble. That was the last time anyone could confirm seeing Clarissa. There were no security cameras in 1969, no GPS, no cell phones. Once Clarissa turned onto the main road, She vanished into the darkness. Her mother, Guadalupe, began to worry when the clock neared 11 p.m. Clarissa was punctual to a fault. She always called if she was running late. Guadalupe waited another 30 minutes before phoning a neighbor who worked nights at a nearby diner, hoping Clarissa had stopped by. Nothing. By midnight, panic had set in. Clarissa's uncle, Armando, joined Guadalupe in his pickup truck. They retraced every possible route between the store and their home, eyes scanning every alley, every lot, every turnoff. Then, at 5:42 a.m., just before sunrise, a pair of early joggers spotted something strange on a quiet side road near a half-abandoned industrial area. A car sat idling near a vacant lot. The driver's door was wide open. The engine still hummed. Police were called immediately. Inside the car, they found Clarissa's purse on the passenger seat, unopened. Her wallet was intact, lipstick, cash, and store receipts untouched. Her store name tag lay on the floor mat. Her neatly folded jacket was still in the back seat. There were no visible signs of struggle, no shattered glass, no blood. Just the eerie stillness of an abandoned vehicle left behind like a paused moment in time. Officers canvassed the area but found no witnesses. No one heard a scream. No one saw anyone leave the car. The lot was bordered by a chain-link fence and a row of shipping containers, used occasionally by a local freight company. The scene offered almost nothing. Clarissa was simply gone. By mid-morning. Word spread across the neighborhood. Friends stopped by the Mendoza home with coffee and questions. Clarissa's siblings stayed glued to the window, watching for her silhouette. Her father, who worked construction out of state, rushed home. That afternoon, a formal missing person report was filed. Flyers were printed. Volunteers joined in search efforts, combing overgrown lots and culverts. Her story made the local radio. But as the hours stretched into days, a chilling question took hold. How could someone disappear so completely on such a short, familiar route? Clarissa had vanished in a window of less than 30 minutes. The car was found less than 5 miles from home. She never made a call, never cried out for help. What could have happened in the narrow window between work and that dark roadside? The 5th day after Clarissa Mendoza vanished brought with it the unbearable heat of a Houston summer and a darkness that would never lift from her family's life. Dozens of searchers, volunteers, neighbors, and members of the Civil Defense Corps had joined local law enforcement in scouring the southeastern region of the city. Hope was thinning by the hour. It was a group of volunteers working along the banks of Sims Bayou, who made the discovery no one wanted but everyone feared. Around 3:30 p.m., wedged beneath a tangle of driftwood and garbage, they spotted the outline of what first looked like a mannequin, pale skin, unmoving, tangled in reeds. But it wasn't plastic. It was the body of a young woman. Her clothing was soaked and torn. Her face showed signs of trauma, deep bruising across the jawline and a wound above her temple. The current had carried her body downstream, catching it in a shallow curve of the bayou. No ID was found on her, no jewelry, just the lifeless form of someone's daughter, sister, friend. When authorities arrived, they quickly suspected it was Clarissa. Her mother had described the blouse she'd worn that Friday, a pale blue button-down with tiny embroidered flowers. Despite the water damage, it matched. An autopsy confirmed it within hours. It was Clarissa Elaine Mendoza. The medical examiner's report was brutal. She had been strangled, likely with a rope or cord. There were ligature marks on her neck, along with defensive wounds on her forearms and under her fingernails. Her hands were scraped and bruised. She had fought back. She had also suffered blunt force trauma to the head, likely from a single strike. The ME estimated she died within 6 hours of leaving work, which meant, when her family was just beginning to panic, Clarissa was already gone. The location of the body raised disturbing questions. Sims Bayou was nearly 8 miles from where her Nova had been found. Investigators believed she didn't get there on her own. Someone had moved her, possibly by vehicle, possibly after keeping her somewhere for a short period. But there were no tire tracks, no drag marks near the bank. Just the current forensics in 1969 were limited. Still, investigators did their best. They collected the clothing, fingernail scrapings, and a few stray fibers found clinging to her skirt. Nylon threads that didn't match her outfit. Tiny hairs were also collected, but without modern DNA analysis, they were cataloged and stored with little immediate use. The condition of her body suggested she'd been dumped within 24 hours of her death. She hadn't been in the water long, which indicated someone had taken time, and then discarded her like trash. Detectives began canvassing the area near the bayou. No one reported seeing a car. No one heard screams. If the killer had an accomplice, they left no trail. If it was a lone predator, he was careful, calculated. Clarissa's family was devastated. Her mother collapsed when told the news. Her siblings cried themselves hoarse. The community gathered at a local parish that night for a candlelight vigil, stunned by the violence and confused by the lack of answers. The evidence collected was fragile, degraded by water, time, and age. But somewhere in those fibers, in the bruises and brokenness, might have been the fingerprint of a killer. The evidence was fragile. But did it hold hidden clues? The weeks following Clarissa Mendoza's murder saw Houston streets plastered with flyers bearing her photo, her warm eyes and bright smile now a symbol of a city's grief and confusion. The Houston Police Department launched what they described as a comprehensive and aggressive investigation. But from the beginning, it was clear the path ahead would be difficult. Dozens of leads came in. Detectives worked long hours, chasing rumors and interviewing anyone remotely connected to Clarissa's final days. Her co-workers were the first to be questioned. They described her as polite, focused, and well-liked. There were no known enemies. She didn't date much. Her world revolved around family and work. Still, police pressed on. A young mechanic who worked 3 blocks from the department store caught their attention, after providing 2 different timelines of where he had been the night Clarissa vanished. One version claimed he was home with his sister. Another had him visiting friends in Galveston. The inconsistency raised red flags. But without physical evidence tying him to the scene, they had to let him go. Then there was the janitor, a man in his 40s who cleaned the department store after hours. 2 co-workers told detectives he had a habit of lingering near the cosmetics counter, longer than necessary, sometimes pretending to sweep nearby while watching Clarissa. One said she'd once heard Clarissa mention how he made her uncomfortable. Police brought him in for questioning. He denied any involvement and had a solid alibi verified by his time card and the building's night supervisor. Without witnesses or hard proof, they had no choice but to move on. The community was growing restless. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some blamed police incompetence, others whispered about possible cover-ups. Neighborhood trust in the authorities was fraying. In predominantly Hispanic communities like Clarissa's, fear turned into action. Local men formed informal safety patrols, walking women home from work and monitoring bus stops. Parents no longer allowed daughters to go out alone after dark. The air was thick with tension and suspicion. Despite the police department's reassurances, behind closed doors, the case was slipping through their fingers. Internal memos later revealed signs of disorganization. Key evidence, like the fibers found on Clarissa's clothing, had been stored improperly. Chain of custody documents were incomplete. 2 detectives reportedly clashed over how the case was being handled. One insisting the janitor was the likely suspect, the other pushing to pursue new leads near Sims Bayou. Their disagreement escalated to formal complaints, causing the investigation to stall further. Clarissa's family felt abandoned. The same officers who had once knocked on their door daily eventually stopped coming. Promises of updates went unfulfilled. Her mother, Guadalupe, began keeping a notebook, writing down every news clipping, every phone call, every name mentioned in whispers. She became the case's unofficial archivist, driven by the fear that her daughter would be forgotten. As summer faded into fall, the Mendoza home remained shrouded in mourning. Clarissa's room stayed untouched. Her makeup case remained on her vanity, brushes still coated with powder. Her youngest brother, only 7, would sit quietly in her chair, waiting for her to come home. By October, the leads dried up. No new suspects, no new tips. The file was quietly moved from the active investigations list to a cold case folder. The city moved on. But for Clarissa's family, time stood still. Had the killer simply disappeared into the city's shadows? Years slipped by like pages turning in a forgotten book. The world moved forward, but inside the Mendoza home, time seemed to stand still. Clarissa's parents aged quietly under the weight of unanswered questions. Her father, who had once spent long hours at construction sites to support the family, retired early, his back bent and his spirit dimmed. Her mother, Guadalupe, clung to faith and ritual, lighting a candle every June 13th, whispering prayers in Spanish and keeping Clarissa's rosary close to her heart. Clarissa's bedroom remained exactly as it was the night she disappeared. The pink curtains faded from sunlight, her record player collecting dust and her favorite scarf draped neatly over a chair. To anyone who stepped inside, it felt like a museum to a life paused mid-sentence. For her younger siblings, growing up in that house meant living in the shadow of a ghost. Every milestone, a graduation, a wedding, a new baby, carried the silent echo of the sister who never got her chance. Over the decades, the investigation shifted hands many times. Each new detective who inherited the thick, yellowing case file promised the family that they would look into it again. But with no witnesses, no leads, and no usable forensic evidence, the promises faded like the ink on the old reports. The box labeled Mendoza, Clarissa, 1969 gathered dust in a police archive room, wedged between hundreds of others. Houston itself transformed during those 50 years. Skyscrapers rose, highways expanded, neighborhoods changed hands. What had once been quiet lots and rural stretches became urban sprawl. Sims Bayou was dredged, reinforced with concrete, its banks now part of a bustling greenway. But beneath the city's progress lay its unsolved ghosts, and Clarissa's was one of them. From time to time, her story resurfaced. A local newspaper would run an anniversary article, often under headlines like Houston's Oldest Unsolved Mysteries or Cold Case from the 60s Still Haunts Family. Those brief flashes of attention brought hope and heartbreak. Tips occasionally trickled in, usually from jailhouse informants claiming to know who did it, or from self-proclaimed psychics who spoke of a man in a uniform or a car by the river. None of it ever led anywhere. Still, Guadalupe refused to give up. Even after her eyesight began to fail, she insisted on lighting a candle every year on the date her daughter vanished. "For the truth to come to light," she would say softly, her hands trembling with age. Her faith became her only form of justice. By the 2000s, Clarissa's siblings had families of their own. They told their children about the aunt they never met, the young woman whose laughter once filled their grandmother's kitchen. They kept her picture framed on the mantel, a symbol of both love and loss. Then, in 2018, a quiet shift occurred inside the Houston Police Department. A federal grant allowed for the reformation of a cold case and forensic reevaluation unit. Their mission: to apply modern DNA testing to unsolved homicides predating 1980. Among the first boxes pulled from storage was one marked Mendoza. When the technician lifted the old evidence bags, brittle with age, labeled in fading ink, something remarkable happened. Despite the decades, some items had been sealed tightly enough to preserve biological material. There was a chance, however small, that the evidence could still speak. For the first time in 50 years, Clarissa's name echoed again in the halls of justice. Could science speak where witnesses once failed? In 2021, over half a century after Clarissa Mendoza's murder, her evidence box was reopened under the bright fluorescent lights of the Houston Police Department's Cold Case Division. Inside were relics of a different era, yellowing reports typed on manual typewriters, sealed bags brittle with age, and small items tagged in faded handwriting. Among them were the clothes Clarissa had been wearing when she was found in Sims Bayou, her blouse, skirt, and torn undergarments. More crucially, the medical examiner in 1969 had taken fingernail scrapings and placed them in 2 separate paper envelopes. These samples, fragile but intact, became the centerpiece of a forensic re-examination. Back in 1969, these materials had held no answers. The science wasn't there yet. But now, with advanced touch DNA and mitochondrial sequencing, they offered a new path forward. Analysts at the Houston Forensic Science Center ran the samples through modern DNA profiling tools. Weeks later, the lab had its result, a partial male DNA profile. It wasn't a full genetic fingerprint, but it was enough. Unfortunately, the profile didn't match anyone in CODIS, the national DNA database. The suspect had never been convicted of a serious enough crime to be in the system. But what couldn't be found through traditional databases might still be uncovered through another method: genetic genealogy. With the Mendoza family's consent, Houston PD partnered with a team of forensic genealogy experts. Using the DNA profile, they uploaded the data to public genetic databases used by millions of people researching their family trees. From there, it became a puzzle of bloodlines, matches, and historical records. They began building trees, dozens of them, comparing the unknown suspects' genetic markers to those of distant relatives. It was tedious work. Every branch required verification through birth certificates, marriage licenses, and census data. After months of research, a single thread emerged that linked the DNA to a specific family line based out of Texas and New Mexico. Within that tree was a name that stood out: Richard Wayne Haskett. Born in Texas, Haskett had lived in Houston briefly during the late 1960s. Records showed that he worked as a delivery assistant for a linen supply company, one that serviced several downtown businesses, including the very department store where Clarissa worked. More alarming was his criminal record. In 1971, just 2 years after Clarissa's death, he had been arrested for assaulting a young woman in Galveston. He pled guilty to a reduced charge and served less than 2 years in prison. After his release, he moved west, to Arizona, where he built a quiet life and never crossed the law again. Investigators obtained a court order for a covert DNA collection. In March 2023, officers followed Haskett to a diner in Tucson. After he discarded a coffee cup, it was retrieved and sent to the lab. The test confirmed what years of silence had buried. The DNA from Clarissa's fingernail scrapings matched the sample from Richard Haskett's discarded cup. The odds of it belonging to anyone else were in the trillions, but still, investigators had to be sure. Was this truly the man who had killed Clarissa Mendoza? Could a man with no known ties to her family, no apparent motive, and a clean record for 50 years really be the answer they'd been chasing for so long? The science had spoken, but the story wasn't over yet. But was this truly the man who killed Clarissa Mendoza? On a quiet morning in early 2023, 2 Houston homicide detectives knocked on the door of a modest stucco house in a quiet Tucson suburb. The home belonged to 75-year-old Richard Wayne Haskett, a retired long-haul truck driver known in the neighborhood for his well-kept lawn, polite demeanor, and regular attendance at church potlucks. He opened the door slowly, wearing a flannel shirt and glasses. Behind him, the smell of coffee lingered. To those watching from across the street, it looked like a routine visit. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. But within minutes, Haskett was in handcuffs, the target of a 54-year-old murder investigation that had never truly closed. When questioned, Haskett claimed he had never heard the name Clarissa Mendoza. He said he had never been to that department store in Houston, that he was working odd jobs in '69 and didn't remember much from that time. But the detectives had more than faded memories. They had DNA. Haskett's genetic material matched the male DNA profile recovered from beneath Clarissa's fingernails with an astronomical certainty. It wasn't a close match. It wasn't a maybe. It was a scientific certainty. As he was booked into the Pima County Jail pending extradition, investigators continued to dig into his past. What they found confirmed what DNA had already begun to reveal. Richard Haskett had a history. Born and raised in Lubbock, Texas, Haskett moved to Houston in the late 1960s to live with an uncle and take up work. Employment records showed he worked for a linen supply company that serviced multiple downtown businesses, including the department store where Clarissa worked, though no records showed a direct interaction between them. The opportunity was there. He would have had access to employee-only areas. He would have known the store layout, the closing times, the exit doors. Even more disturbing was what the sealed court documents revealed. In 1971, 2 years after Clarissa's death, Haskett had been arrested and charged with aggravated assault against a 19-year-old woman in Galveston. He had grabbed her while she was walking alone, attempted to force her into his car, but fled when a passerby intervened. Because he was only 22 at the time and had no prior convictions, he was granted youthful offender status. The charge was reduced and the records were sealed. He served less than 2 years before fading from the criminal system completely. Now, 5 decades later, he was being named in one of Houston's longest-running cold cases. The news of his arrest made headlines in both Texas and Arizona. In Houston, it reopened old wounds. For Clarissa's surviving siblings, it was a moment they had prayed for, but one that came with deep conflicting emotions. In Tucson, neighbors were stunned. They described Haskett as friendly, soft-spoken, and dependable. He volunteered with a local food pantry and often helped elderly neighbors carry groceries. Richard? A murderer? I can't believe it, one woman told local news. He's the guy who shovels snow off my walkway. He's just normal. That paradox, a man capable of brutal violence living undetected for decades, left many struggling to reconcile the two versions of Richard Haskett. But now, the story was shifting from investigation to prosecution. The Mendoza family would have to face him in court. But would the trial bring clarity or more questions? In November 2024, the trial of Richard Wayne Haskett commenced in a packed Harris County courtroom, more than 55 years after Clarissa Elaine Mendoza was murdered. The weight of time hung heavy in the room. News crews crowded the hallway. Cold case advocates and legal experts filled the gallery. But for Clarissa's family, seated in the front row each day, this wasn't about spectacle. It was about facing the man who had stolen a life and stolen decades of peace. Her younger brother, now in his 60s, held a folded photo of Clarissa in his pocket. Her sister wore Clarissa's favorite necklace. They had waited a lifetime for this. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Melissa Garza, opened with clarity and force. This case may be old, but the evidence has never been louder. Over the course of 3 weeks, Garza and her team built their case meticulously. They walked the jury through Clarissa's life, the night she vanished and the grim discovery in Sims Bayou. But the heart of their case was science. Garza presented the DNA results recovered from Clarissa's fingernails, linking them directly to Haskett with overwhelming probability. Forensic analysts explained how modern technology had pulled usable genetic material from decades-old evidence, and how the results were verified through both direct testing and genealogical triangulation. The prosecution also revealed Haskett's work history, how he had access to the department store through his job, placing him in proximity to Clarissa. They brought in records of his 1971 assault conviction, introducing it under a pattern of behavior argument. A retired police officer even testified that the attack in Galveston bore striking similarities. A young woman, walking alone, grabbed suddenly by a man with no known motive. The defense attempted to cast doubt. They questioned the chain of custody for the evidence, suggesting the DNA sample could have been contaminated. They argued that too much time had passed, that memories faded, and that circumstantial evidence should not determine a man's fate more than 50 years later. But the prosecution remained firm. The DNA was not circumstantial. It was clear. It was preserved, documented, and confirmed by independent labs. As the trial neared its end, the jury heard emotional testimony from Clarissa's surviving family. Her brother described the day she vanished. Her sister spoke through tears about birthdays that passed without her, about dreams Clarissa never got to chase. The courtroom sat in silence as their pain echoed across generations. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. 10 hours later, they returned with their decision. Guilty Richard Wayne Haskett was convicted of first-degree murder. The sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Clarissa's family wept, quiet, exhausted tears. Outside the courtroom, they embraced one another, their relief mingling with grief. Some held hands in prayer. Others simply stood in silence, unsure what to feel now that the waiting was over. But amid the victory, an unshakable truth remained. Clarissa was still gone. No verdict could bring her back. No sentence could fill the empty chair at the family table or replace the decades of memories that were never made. The justice system had delivered its answer. But for those who had lived in the shadow of her loss, another question lingered. What does justice really mean, 50 years too late? In the southeast corner of Houston, where the neighborhoods still echo with the rhythms of tradition and resilience, a mural stretches across a brick wall, 12 feet high and bursting with color. At its center is the portrait of a young woman with warm eyes and a soft smile, framed by roses and monarch butterflies. Above her image, a phrase painted in Spanish reads, Tu luz sigue brillando. Your light still shines. That woman is Clarissa Elaine Mendoza. More than 5 decades after her life was taken, her name no longer resides solely in the cold corridors of police archives. Instead, it lives in paint, in memory, and legacy. The mural was commissioned by local artists and community leaders shortly after Richard Haskett's conviction. It stands just 2 blocks from where Clarissa grew up, in a neighborhood that once mourned her loss in silence, but now honors her in celebration. But that isn't the only legacy she's left behind. With donations from local businesses, advocacy groups, and former classmates, the Mendoza family established the Clarissa Mendoza Beauty Arts Scholarship. Every year, the scholarship helps young women, especially those from underserved communities, pursue careers in cosmetology, just as Clarissa had once dreamed. The recipients don't just receive financial support. They're told Clarissa's story. They're reminded that her dreams didn't die with her. They live on in them. The impact of Clarissa's case has also rippled beyond the walls of remembrance. In the wake of the trial, the Houston Police Department quietly launched a grant-funded initiative to digitize, review, and retest evidence from over 400 unsolved homicide cases, most dating back to the 1960s and 70s. They've partnered with forensic labs and genealogy experts, determined to ensure that what happened to Clarissa, decades of unanswered questions, does not happen again. Her case has become a touchstone in training seminars for new detectives. Her story is shared during cold case unit briefings as a testament to the power of persistence and the evolving strength of forensic science. She is no longer a forgotten name on a dusty file. She is a symbol of what justice can eventually mean, even when it arrives late. For her family, though, the justice they received was bittersweet. The weight of relief rests heavy on shoulders worn by grief. Clarissa's siblings, now grandparents themselves, have said many times that justice does not erase pain. It merely ends the question that haunted every birthday, every anniversary, every quiet moment alone. Her mother, Guadalupe, passed away before the arrest. She never got to see her prayers answered, but in her final years, she held on to hope that the world would not forget her daughter's name. And it hasn't. The Mendoza family now speaks not only of how Clarissa died, but more often of how she lived, how she made everyone feel seen, how she walked her cousin to school each morning, how she saved tips in a jar marked Escuela because she believed her dreams were worth the wait. Clarissa Mendoza was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a young woman with a vision for her life and love for her family. She was not defined by her death but remembered for her light, one that injustice tried to extinguish, but which continues to burn in every life she's touched. Clarissa Mendoza was a light extinguished far too soon. Clarissa Elaine Mendoza's story is not only a chronicle of loss, it is a powerful testament to what can happen when science, persistence, and humanity intersect. For over 5 decades, her case lingered in silence, her name absent from headlines, her file collecting dust in the archives of forgotten victims. It was her family, rooted in love, driven by memory, who refused to let the world forget. Her mother's candlelit prayers, her siblings' tireless search for answers, and the strength of a community unwilling to surrender to time ultimately brought her story back to life. And it was science, modern DNA technology paired with the rise of forensic genealogy, that gave her a voice when no witnesses could. Richard Wayne Haskett's conviction proved that justice, though long delayed, was not unreachable. But even that verdict could never restore what was taken. The joy Clarissa brought to her family, the future she was building, or the simple peace of knowing she was safe. Her case reminds us that behind every cold case is a family still grieving, still hoping. It shows that no matter how many years pass, truth leaves traces. On fabric, in bone, under fingernails, and with the right hands, those traces can speak. May Clarissa's story be a catalyst for change, for renewed investigations, for victim remembrance, and for the belief that justice is worth the wait. Because while justice may come late, legacy never fades, and Clarissa's light still shines. If her story moved you, share it, subscribe, and remember, behind every statistic is a life, a name, a story waiting to be told.